Hi, this is Decentered Media, conversations about community-focused communications for positive social change. Hello, Rob Watson here for Decentered Media, and this is just a summary update of what the community media Zoom meeting is going to be about this week. It takes place on Thursdays, and you can get a link by subscribing to our Decentered Media Patreon account, which is patreon.com/decenteredmedia, or you can go to decentered.co.uk for details. This week we are going to be discussing and talking about the nature of local media, and there's a few things that have got me thinking about what the nature of the phrase, how we use the word local, and what the terminology is about, and how it kind of gets bandied about. And my concern is that we need to tighten up on this and to think through what the consequences are of letting people use the terms like local, or even terms like quality, or terms like community are thrown around a lot in our media and our press and our marketing, but it becomes a kind of meaningless phrase because it's not grounded in evidence sometimes, and it's not based on experience. So what do we mean by local? So if we're considering, say, a local radio station, or something that purports to be a local radio station, or a local newspaper, something that purports to be local, what do we mean by that? And there's a kind of, sometimes I think the regulators and the government, kind of administrators of these systems and these public resources and commercial resources are looking at this from a top down. So they see anything that isn't national, so it's like national, regional, local, as if somehow then it's automatic that what isn't done nationally or regionally is by default local. Well, that's an absurd contradiction, because clearly it can't automatically be local. It must be something, it is something, but it's not necessarily local. And the other kind of way to look at this is, if from the bottom up, if you like, is to say, and to ask, well, if it's not local, why is it regional, and why is it national, and where do things fit within that, and who has responsibility at which level? And so the term local gets thrown around local shops, local supermarkets, local businesses, and it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, they're in your neighbourhood, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what is local in a meaningful sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are employing or practicing anything which is related to the dynamic of the local community, the local civic life, the local economy. It can be done from afar. And so this thinking about how our media is localized is quite an essential thing for us to discuss and think about. Localness is one of those terms that everybody kind of aspires to, and government policy for many years now has practiced and preached localness, but there's a real kind of concern that what is actually enabled to happen is, if you like, in practice it doesn't turn out to be something which is determined locally. And so questions of locality is, yes, okay, things might be available locally, services might be available locally, but there's no accountability locally. So there's no way that people who live locally, I mean, think about, a local Facebook group has no way of engaging with or talking to Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. So it's completely devoid of any local accountability, and it becomes something which is regarded as simply something that, a way of defining a service that's provided for. Hello. Somebody's having a good sniff. So it's become something which is about something which is like an easy to use cliched marketing phrase, but it doesn't actually generate any connection with and payback for and involvement with local people. So one of the analogies that I've kind of come up with is thinking about how food is determined as of local origin. And before the UK left the EU, we are part of, and I think we still in some ways are part of, the Protected Designated Origin (PDO) scheme of food. So Parma ham, for example, comes from Parma, and it is protected that nobody else can call ham of a similar variety. Nobody else can call that Parma ham. It has to be something which is specifically made in a specific place. And in here in the UK, Cornish pasties can't be called, can't be named pasties. Can't be called Cornish pasties if they're not made in Cornwall. In Melton Mowbray, pork pies, the Melton Mowbray pork pie can only be made in a designated part around of Leicestershire, around Melton Mowbray. The same with Stilton cheese, that can only be made in the vicinity of Melton Mowbray as well. So these are protected names. So we can do that for food. Can we do that for our media? So a newspaper here in Leicester, the Leicester Mercury, for example, is produced in Derby, and the local office, they might have local reporters here, but the office is now in Derby. So you can't walk up to the office and knock on the door and say, please can you explain to me why you're running these particular articles and running these particular features and carrying these types of stories. You're no longer in a position of being able to directly intervene, and it is made from afar. And this connects back to something which the Annan report in 1977, which has prefigured a lot of the broadcasting reforms that were brought in the 1980s, was kind of concerned with that media shouldn't be produced from afar and for communities. It should be produced within communities and by those communities and members of those communities, and that is a really good determinate rule of thumb. We've become so used to corporate consolidation, and the industrial media conglomerates have defined their corporate planning and branding and program to such a way that they've consolidated any format basis, and they are looking to be able to change without any recourse, or without anybody asking the question, is this in the public interest, for a station, for 5 stations all serving the same kind of audience with the same kind of music and the same kind of information to be playing out in a particular area. That is the kind of what they call deregulation. I call it consolidation of a market position, and it stifles, does it potentially stifle and lock out small scale producers? And again, a useful analogy which I've used many times is the analogy of the coffee shop. You're an independent coffee shop, you're a barista, you want to run your own business, you source your own coffee beans or even roast your own coffee beans, and you set up, you secure premises and you build long-term relationships, but then you kind of don't want to be flooded out by 5 big multiple international conglomerate chains who can get good deals on property leases so they see that you're doing well, and then suddenly they launch into kind of uncompetitive practices. I suspect that's kind of what is happening with our media, because the globalization of media, and some of this is understandable to an extent. The pressures on from globalization mean that businesses, corporations are increasingly competing against other media forms. So streaming services, for example, radio is no longer commercial. Music radio is no longer simply competing against other radio stations, but are competing against Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube, and other people get their people get their services from their streaming provider that they are connected with via their phone contracts, and so people don't have radios in the same way. So it's understandable to some extent, but broadcasting still has a particular value and a particular social role to play, because broadcasting is something which, okay, when we're about to go, it seems that we're about to go into a recession, and it seems that a lot of people are under pressure to lose and unsubscribe from their streaming services. Well, where do they turn to next? And if there isn't variety in the broadcast marketplace because of the economic dynamics of that, then people are going to find that they've got no choice, they've got nothing to fall back on, which is part of the reason why the BBC's public service remit and its universal service remit is so essential, is because when push comes to shove and we are squeezed financially and we have to give up on Netflix and Disney and Apple subscriptions, that we have something that we can depend upon, and that the BBC is expected to be a provider of information, news and entertainment that is consistently and constantly available. And the pandemic demonstrated the need to have these things. Don't take the risk of relying on the market when the market fluctuations are could potentially be so volatile, and that radio producers, broadcasters, media producers can go bust and their services are amalgamated. And we've seen this with in America with Warner and Discovery merging and axing a load of their services. So services that they used to maintain, they no longer regard as being viable. And it's a bit, the chain coffee shop example is a good model, because or banks, when the economic circumstances are become tough, they close branches and you don't get a say on that. But do you want your local radio station to be closed or just turned into another generic station? Let's close the branch and sack all the people and just put vending machines in there. And I'm very skeptical and critical of the mode by which commercial radio is kind of celebrated sometimes, because a lot of it strikes me as kind of excessive automation, and it may as well be a kind of the equivalent of a vending machine in a automat service station, where you just press the buttons and it's some generic kind of stuff comes out of it and there's no people involved. And I think human life, while that might be perfectly serviceable as a product, I think we are dependent on human interaction and human connections, and the primary purpose of media is to mediate human life, and to enable us to connect with one another and understand what our stories are and understand what our anxieties and joys and experiences of life are, not to merely kind of regurgitate press releases or regurgitate stories that have been seen on social media and to play to a pattern. And I think somebody the other day kind of suggested to me that I might be a bit of an elitist, and to some extent, yeah, I am, but on the basis that I think media is a democratic human right. However, I don't want to see, I believe in human progression, I suppose. I think, if you go and talk to somebody and you go back to them in 10 years' time and they haven't changed, something isn't right. And if our expectations are that people are always the same and human nature is always static, and all we can do is turn on a circle and repeat what we've already done, that doesn't strike me as a very interesting world to live in. If the model of engagement and consumer kind of citizen human engagement is really that kind of basic, then with the problems and the challenges we've got, climate change, artificial intelligence, growing inequality, globalization, the kind of bringing together of cultures and people from from all kinds of various ways and places, if we don't have the capacity to meet those needs, then we're not going to survive and we're not going to do very well. We'll regress, and we'll go, we'll conflict. And so, sorry, I'm kind of feel like I'm losing the tangent in terms of what this means for local. So I think local is something that we need to protect, whether it's commercial or community, but it has to be done on the basis that there are protections for local media that mean that the large corporate organisations are not given a free ride to trample over and to skewer the market. So let's think of there's another analogy I've used the last couple of days, which is the motorway, you know, the 3-lane autobahn, and on the fast lane are this slick, big, you know, kind of cruisers moving from city to city, and they don't require a speed limit, and they are luxurious, and people pay an awful lot of money for cars that can run along, you know, vehicles that can run along those lanes. But on the outside lane, the slow lane, are the people who want to turn off and go and visit a local village and you know, take part in community life, and don't just want to fly over places, but want to be. We've seen that so much in urban development, that a route is, you know, built through a thriving community, and it kills it, and there was no concern for the people who were living there. And a lot of that, you know, I feel a lot of our industrial media has that kind of tenor, that it's people just flying over and driving past, and you know, kind of overshooting rather than being part of and being integrated within communities. And that's why I think we've got a lot of people who feel as if they're left behind, and so the reforms that we might need to tie up our media policy with our levelling up policy, and local is one of those issues that's been raised as a concern within the levelling up policy. Anyway, there's lots more we can discuss about, and really interesting to hear a range of views and to kind of understand where different types of media fit in with these things. And if you want to get involved, you can either contact me on Twitter and Instagram at Decentered Media. You can go to the website, which is decentered.co.uk, and you can sign up via Patreon, patreon.com/Decentered Media. But it'd be great to have a chat with you and to be part of the conversation. Visit decentered.co.uk or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Decentered Media.